July 25, 1944. Saint-Lô, France. Oberfeldwebel Hartmann pressed his eye to the Panther's rangefinder and watched American armor roll across the bocage 2 kilometers distant. The shapes were different this time. Longer barrels, wider turrets. Something had changed. Behind him, 300 meters back in the tree line, Corporal Muller adjusted the traverse wheel and waited for the order to fire. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 was among the finest anti-tank guns in the world. Its sloped frontal armor had turned aside countless American shells. They had nothing to fear from Shermans, or so they'd been told. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The first shell arrived without warning. It punched through the Panther's side armor with a sound like tearing metal. Hartmann felt the impact through his boots. The 70mm thick steel that was supposed to be impenetrable had been violated from a range they'd considered safe, from a gun they'd been assured was inadequate. In that instant, staring at the smoke curling through a hole that shouldn't exist, Hartmann realized that something fundamental had shifted in the mathematics of survival. They had tested, captured American tanks before. They knew the 75mm gun posed little threat to a Panther from any angle beyond point-blank range. But this was different. This was geometry made lethal. This was American industry, translating mass production into armor penetration at distances German doctrine said were impossible. And if they were wrong about the range, what else had they been wrong about? The story of how German tankers discovered the truth about the American 76mm gun begins not in France, but 25 kilometers south of Berlin, at a testing facility where captured enemy equipment went to reveal its secrets. Kummersdorf, proving ground, had been the German Army's primary weapons testing center since 1880. By 1943, it had become a repository of Allied technology. Every captured tank that could be transported was shipped there, photographed, measured, fired upon, and sometimes fired. On February 22, 1943, an M4A1 Sherman named War Daddy II arrived from Tunisia. Captured from the 1st Armored Regiment during the Battle of Sidi Bouzid, it represented America's standard medium tank. German engineers marked its armor thickness with white paint, 51mm on the glacis, 76mm on the turret front. Adequate, but not exceptional. The 75mm gun it carried was familiar. German intelligence had extensive data. At 1,000 meters, it could penetrate 88mm of vertical armor. Respectable against a Panzerwaffe, useless against a Panther's frontal arc. The mathematics were clear. American tankers would need to flank or die. But mathematics have a way of changing when the variables shift. By mid-1944, reports from the Italian theater began describing a new variant. Same chassis, same silhouette, but with a longer barrel and a different sound when it fired. The intelligence summaries were vague, possibly a tank destroyer, possibly a limited production run, nothing to alter strategic assessments. Then, Normandy happened. On July 2nd, 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower received urgent communications from tank battalion commanders. The 75mm gun was proving catastrophically inadequate against Panthers. Crews were dying in burning Shermans because they couldn't penetrate German armor from any practical range. The kill ratio was approaching 5 American tanks lost for every Panther destroyed. Eisenhower demanded options. A testing board convened on July 12th. Their findings were grim. None of the standard American weapons could defeat a Panther frontally. The 3-inch gun on the M10 tank destroyer could penetrate the mantlet, but only from 200 yards, suicide range in open combat. But sitting idle in Britain were 130 Shermans mounting a new weapon, the 76mm M1 gun. It had arrived in April for evaluation, but was rejected by field commanders who preferred the 75mm superior high-explosive round for infantry support. Tank versus tank combat wasn't supposed to be the Sherman's primary role. That doctrine died in the hedgerows of France. General Omar Bradley ordered every available 76mm Sherman rushed to the front for Operation Cobra. 102 arrived just in time for the offensive's second day, July 25th. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions received the majority. Crews received hasty training, load, aim, fire. The principles were the same, only the performance changed. The gun was 52 calibers long, shortened from the original 57 caliber design to fit the Sherman's turret. It fired the same ammunition as the 3-inch anti-tank gun, but from a lighter carriage. Muzzle velocity, 2,600 feet per second, with standard M62 armor-piercing rounds. At 1,000 meters, it could penetrate 106 millimeters of vertical armor. At 100 meters, 125 millimeters, still insufficient to defeat a Panther's frontal glacis, which sloped at 55 degrees and measured 80 millimeters thick. The effective thickness against a perpendicular hit exceeded 140 millimeters. The mathematics remained unfavorable, but tanks don't always face forward. The Panther's side armor measured 40 millimeters, the rear 45 millimeters, and at 2,000 meters, approximately 2,000 yards, the American measurement, the 76mm M62 round, retained enough energy to punch through both. German tankers at Kummersdorf discovered this through methodical testing sometime in mid to late 1944. Exact records are sparse, lost in the chaos of war's end, but photographs survive, showing captured Shermans on the firing range, their guns trained on hulks of German armor. The tests measured penetration against various angles, against various ranges, against the armor plates of Panthers awaiting repair. The results would have been clinical, dispassionate, the sort of data that fills technical reports. Front glacis, impenetrable beyond 500 meters. Mantlet, vulnerable to deflection shots, but unreliable. Turret side, penetration confirmed at 1,500 meters. Hull side, penetration confirmed at 2,000 meters. 2,000 meters. That number would have hung in the air like smoke. It meant American tankers with the new gun could kill Panthers from ranges where German doctrine said they were safe. It meant the mathematics of engagement had fundamentally shifted. It meant every tactical assumption about fighting Shermans needed revision. But numbers on paper and combat reality occupy different worlds. Oberleutnant Werner Steinhardt commanded a Panther from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, during Operation Cobra. His tank, number 424, earned infamy on July 27th when it destroyed 9 Shermans and numerous other vehicles near the village of Lorey along the Saint-Lô to Coutances road. The engagement began at a crossroads where Steinhardt positioned his Panther beneath an oak tree, watching an American convoy approach. The bocage provided cover. The narrow roads forced the Americans into a column. The first Sherman reached 200 meters before Steinhardt gave the order to fire. 1 round, 1 kill. The second Sherman died the same way. Panic rippled through the convoy. Half-tracks and trucks attempted to reverse. Steinhardt's machine gunner raked them with MG-42 fire, while the main gun lobbed high-explosive shells into the chaos. Then 2 more Shermans appeared from the left. These fought back. 75mm rounds struck the Panther's frontal armor and bounced away, leaving only scars in the steel. But not all the Shermans carried 75mm guns anymore. By late afternoon, American reinforcements arrived, among them the longer-barreled variants. The crews had learned from earlier massacres. They didn't charge frontally. They maneuvered through the bocage, using the terrain that constrained both sides equally. They called in airstrikes. P-47 Thunderbolts dropped bombs that exploded within 5 meters of Steinhardt's position. The Panther survived, but the engagement revealed something crucial. American tanks were adapting. The new guns couldn't penetrate frontally, but they could hurt Panthers from angles that had previously been safe. And there were always more Shermans than Panthers. The tactical reports from Normandy painted a picture that contradicted German assumptions. Panthers weren't being defeated by superior American armor. They were being defeated by arithmetic. For every Panther fielded, the Americans deployed 10 Shermans. For every German tank destroyed, 2 more arrived from factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Grand Blanc. The United States was producing more tanks in a month than Germany could manufacture in a quarter, and now Those tanks carried guns that could kill from the flanks at ranges previously considered safe zones. Hauptmann Friedrich Koch reviewed captured American technical manuals at a Wehrmacht intelligence office in Paris during early August 1944. The documents, seized from a destroyed Sherman near Avranches, they detailed specifications for the 76mm M1A1 gun, penetration tables, engagement ranges, ammunition types. One section caught his attention: ballistic performance against angled armor. The American engineers had calculated everything. They knew their gun couldn't penetrate a Panther frontally, but they'd done the mathematics on side shots, rear shots, deflection angles. They'd designed their tactics around geometry, not courage. And they'd added a notation about a new ammunition type, HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing, tungsten core, estimated delivery, August 1944. Koch wrote in his report, "The enemy has solved the Panther problem, not through superior design, but through superior production and tactical adaptation." Each American tank commander now understands that frontal engagement is suicide. They maneuver for flanking shots. They coordinate attacks from multiple angles. They trade losses we cannot afford to inflict for kills we cannot afford to sustain. The mathematics of attrition were brutal. Germany's total Panther production from 1943 through war's end would reach approximately 6,000 tanks. American Sherman production exceeded 50,000, even with a 5-to-1 kill ratio, heavily optimistic given actual combat results. The numbers didn't work. On August 7th, 1944, 2,000 HVAP rounds arrived in France by air transport. The new ammunition could penetrate the Panther's mantelet at 1,000 yards. Not reliably, not every shot, but enough to matter. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman had received only 5 HVAP rounds, 1 per month. Supply couldn't match demand, but even 5 rounds changed the equation. It meant every 76mm Sherman posed a credible threat to any German armor at ranges where previously they'd been helpless. German tankers learned to fear the longer-barreled Shermans not because they were superior tanks, but because they represented a shift in American doctrine. The appearance of a 76mm gun meant the crew had been trained for anti-armor work. It meant they'd coordinate with other 76mm tanks. It meant they'd accepted casualties as the price of flanking. Maneuvers. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Feldwebel Hans Becker survived 3 Panther losses during the autumn of 1944. The first, near Aracourt in September, took a 76mm round through the engine deck from 800 meters. The crew escaped. The second, during the Ardennes offensive in December, was struck in the turret ring by a 76mm round that jammed the traverse. Immobilized, they abandoned it. The third, in January 1945 near the German border, suffered a track break and was destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture. He later described the evolution of American tactics. In July, they charged directly at us and died. By September, they'd learned to use terrain. By December, they hunted in packs. 3 or 4 Shermans would approach from different angles. One would draw our fire from the front, accepting the hit because their wet ammunition storage made fires less likely. While we engaged the frontal target, the others would maneuver for side shots. The 76mm guns meant those side shots were lethal from a kilometer away. We couldn't traverse fast enough, couldn't prioritize targets correctly. There were always too many of them. The Panther's technical superiority became irrelevant when outnumbered 5-to-1 by opponents who'd learned how to kill it. Back at Kummersdorf, testing continued on whatever Allied equipment could be captured and transported. By late 1944, the facility had accumulated several Sherman variants: M4A1s with cast hulls, M4A3s with welded hulls, models with 75mm guns, models with 76mm guns, one M10 tank destroyer with the 3-inch gun. Engineer testimony from Soviet interrogations after the war suggests that comparative firing tests were conducted, though exact dates are unclear. A Panther hull would be positioned at measured distances. Various Allied guns would fire at it from different angles. The penetrations, or lack thereof, would be photographed and documented. The tests confirmed what combat had already taught. American 76mm guns posed a serious threat to Panther side and rear armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. 2,000 meters wasn't a guarantee, but it was achievable with good ammunition and a skilled gunner. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. What made the 76mm particularly dangerous wasn't its penetration against frontal armor, but its performance against side armor at extended ranges. German tactical doctrine assumed Panthers could engage American tanks from 2,000 meters while remaining effectively invulnerable. That assumption held against 75mm Shermans. It collapsed against 76mm variants. The psychological impact on German tank crews was significant. Panther commander Ernst von Bachmann, the same officer who destroyed 9 Shermans near Lorey, later reflected on the changing dynamics. In the beginning, we felt superior. The Panther could kill from distances where American guns were useless, but by autumn, that advantage meant nothing. They simply refused to fight on our terms. They'd bypass us, call artillery, summon aircraft. When they did engage, it was from multiple directions simultaneously. The 76mm gun meant we couldn't ignore flanking tanks anymore. Every Sherman had to be treated as a legitimate threat. The captured technical data told one story. Combat told another. But both converged on the same conclusion. American industrial capacity and tactical adaptation had neutralized Germany's qualitative advantage in armor. By January 1945, the U.S. 12th Army Group refused to accept any more 75mm Shermans. All tanks shipped to Europe were to mount 76mm guns. The infantry support role could be handled by specialized vehicles. Tank battalions needed anti-armor capability. German intelligence monitored this shift. Reports noted the increasing prevalence of 76mm guns, noted the improved crew training, noted the refined tactics. The assessments were clinical, dispassionate, and increasingly desperate. One report from February 1945 observed, the American 76mm gun represents not a revolution in technology, but an evolution in application. Combined with numerical superiority, air superiority, and artillery superiority, it provides sufficient anti-armor capability to negate our advantages in armor quality. The enemy has learned that 5 adequate tanks coordinating their fire will defeat 1 superior tank. This lesson has been purchased with thousands of destroyed Shermans, but they can afford the tuition. We cannot afford the casualties inflicted during their education. The Kummersdorf facility itself fell to Soviet forces in April 1945. Advancing Red Army units discovered the testing grounds largely abandoned. Some equipment had been evacuated west, some had been destroyed in place. The Panther hulls marked with impact points and penetration measurements were photographed by Soviet intelligence teams documenting German military technology. One such photograph shows a Panther Osfid G with multiple penetrations in the side armor. White paint marks indicate range and angle for each hit. The measurements are precise, clinical, the sort of data that fills engineering reports. But behind each measurement was a tactical reality. At these ranges, from these angles, American 76mm guns could kill. For the tankers who'd crewed Panthers in the bocage of France, in the forests of the Ardennes, in the final, desperate battles in Germany itself, those measurements represented more than ballistic data. They represented the evolution of American tactical doctrine from frontal assaults to coordinated flanking maneuvers. They represented the moment when quantity married competence and became lethality. Oberfeldwebel Hartmann, whose Panther had been penetrated near Saint-Lô on July 25th, survived the war. His tank did not. After the side penetration, they'd withdrawn for repairs. The Panther returned to action in August with new side skirts, thin armor plates designed to defeat anti-tank rifle rounds and possibly disrupt shape-charge weapons. They provided minimal protection against 76mm kinetic penetrators, but they offered psychological comfort. The Panther was destroyed for good in September during fighting near the German border. 3 Shermans engaged from different angles. The Panther killed 2. The third fired from 700 meters into the engine compartment. The crew escaped. The tank burned. Hartmann later described his evolving understanding. We believed our armor made us invincible. The first Shermans we faced confirmed this. Their shells bounced away harmlessly. But the Americans learned quickly. By late summer, they understood our armor's geometry. They knew where we were vulnerable. They knew how to force us to expose those vulnerabilities, and they had enough tanks to trade losses for positional advantage. The 76mm gun didn't defeat the Panther through superior design. It defeated the Panther by being adequate enough, in sufficient numbers, wielded by crews who'd learned from their dead. The technical specifications told part of the story. The 76mm M1 gun fired a 15-pound armor-piercing projectile at 2,600 feet per second. At 2,000 meters, it retained approximately 2,000 feet per second against 40mm armor plate at 90 degrees. That velocity guaranteed penetration. Against angled armor, performance degraded but remained sufficient against Panther sides and rear. But specifications didn't capture the human element. The American tank crews who'd climbed into Shermans knowing they were outgunned, the officers who'd revised tactics after watching entire platoons burn, the industrial workers who'd produced 50,000 Shermans because the national economy could absorb that scale of production without strain. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers, remarkable tanks, superior armor, superior gun, superior optics, but 6,000 couldn't defeat 50,000. Not when the 50,000 learned how to fight. The testing ground at Kummersdorf stood silent in the spring of 1945. Soviet engineers picked through the wreckage of the Third Reich's military research apparatus, cataloging what remained. Among the debris, technical reports on Allied armor, firing tables for captured weapons, and the hulks of tanks that had been shot to pieces in the name of science. One Soviet intelligence officer, reviewing the German test data on American 76mm penetration, noted in his report, "The fascists understood the capabilities of enemy weapons with precision. Their failure was not in intelligence gathering, but in the mathematics of production. They knew exactly how the Americans would kill them. They simply lacked the industrial capacity to prevent it." The Panther, that had served as a test target, its side armor perforated with holes marked and measured, was eventually shipped to Moscow for further study. It joined a collection of German equipment that Soviet engineers examined for insights into armor design, manufacturing techniques, and tactical employment. But the lessons weren't really about the Panther. They were about what happens when tactical excellence meets strategic exhaustion. By March 1945, the average Sherman battalion in Europe was 40% 76mm guns. The remainder still carried 75mm guns for infantry support, but every tank company had at least one platoon capable of engaging German armor at extended ranges, combined with HVAP ammunition, though still in short supply, and refined tactics. American tank units had achieved parity in tank versus tank combat, not superiority, parity. Panthers still killed more Shermans than Shermans killed Panthers, but the exchange ratio had shifted from catastrophic to acceptable, from 10-1 to 3-1. And when you could field 10 tanks for every enemy tank, a 3-1 loss ratio meant victory. German tank commanders understood this arithmetic with brutal clarity. Hauptmann Wilhelm Bartelboth, who commanded a company of Panthers during the final months, later wrote, "We won every engagement and lost the campaign. My company destroyed 47 American tanks in February and March 1945. We lost 11 Panthers in the same period. A magnificent kill ratio, utterly meaningless. The Americans replaced their losses within days. Our replacements never came. By April, I commanded 3 operational Panthers. The Americans facing us had multiplied. The 76mm gun's real achievement wasn't penetrating Panther armor frontally, because it largely couldn't. Its achievement was being adequate enough at ranges long enough to matter in the war of attrition that the Western Front had become. At 2,000 meters, a 76mm Sherman couldn't reliably penetrate a Panther's frontal armor, but it could penetrate the side. And in the fluid combat of 1945, with German forces in constant retreat, defending multiple axes stretched beyond breaking, Panthers were constantly exposing their flanks, constantly forced into positions where their superior frontal armor meant nothing. The test data from Kummersdorf had proven what combat confirmed. The Panther was vulnerable from the sides at ranges where German doctrine assumed it was safe. American tankers learned to exploit that vulnerability through coordinated attacks. British tankers, using Fireflies with 17-pounder guns, learned the same lesson. Soviet tankers with 85mm guns applied similar tactics. The Panther's superiority evaporated when it couldn't dictate engagement range and angle. Feldwebel Hans Becker, who'd survived 3 Panther losses, found himself in April 1945 commanding a Panzer IV. No Panthers remained available for his unit. The Panzer IV, with its 80mm frontal armor and short 75mm gun, was catastrophically outmatched by American 76mm Shermans at any range. He described the experience. The Panther made you feel powerful, invincible even, from the front. The Panzer IV made you feel mortal. We couldn't penetrate them from frontal angles beyond 500 meters. They could penetrate us from a kilometer. The tactical situation had reversed completely. Now we were the ones seeking flanking positions. Now we were the ones hoping to catch them unaware. The Americans didn't even need their 76mm guns against us. Their old 75mm models could destroy a Panzer IV with ease. The irony was perfect. Germany's industrial collapse meant Panthers were replaced by inferior tanks. America's industrial expansion meant 75mm Shermans were replaced by superior guns. The trajectory was diverging. One side getting stronger, one side weakening. By war's end, over 600,000 German soldiers had been killed on the Western Front since D-Day. Tank losses were proportionally severe. Of the approximately 6,000 Panthers produced, fewer than 100 survived to May 1945. Most were destroyed in combat. Many were abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortage. Some were demolished by their own crews to prevent capture. American Sherman losses were substantial. Over 4,000 destroyed in the European theater, but production had exceeded 50,000. The losses were replaced. The dead crews were replaced. The tactical lessons were incorporated. The 76mm gun became standard. The German test reports from Kummersdorf, clinical in their precision, had documented a truth that combat experience reinforced. American armor doctrine succeeded not through technological superiority, but through adequate technology deployed in overwhelming numbers with continuously improving tactics. One particularly detailed German report, dated October 1944, analyzed the tactical employment of American 76mm Shermans based on combat observations and interrogation of captured crews. The assessment concluded, the enemy 76mm gun tank is employed in coordinated attacks with 3 to 5 vehicles engaging simultaneously from multiple axes. Frontal penetrations against Panther armor are rare and appear accidental. Side and rear penetrations are common at ranges from 800 to 2,000 meters. Enemy crews demonstrate understanding of our armor's weaknesses and actively maneuver to exploit them. Enemy willingness to accept casualties in order to achieve favorable positioning indicates high morale and confidence in replacement availability. Recommend priority targeting of 76mm variants to reduce enemy anti-armor capability. The recommendation was tactically sound and strategically irrelevant. Prioritizing certain enemy tanks made sense in individual engagements, but it didn't change the fundamental imbalance. Germany couldn't replace losses. America could. Germany couldn't expand production. America already had. The Panther remained, tank for tank, a superior vehicle to the Sherman throughout the war. Better gun, better armor, better optics. In a duel between a Panther and a 76mm Sherman at 1,000 meters range, both presenting frontal aspects, the Panther would win almost every time. But wars aren't fought as duels. Oberfeldwebel Hartmann returned to Germany in 1946 after release from a POW camp. He'd survived the war through a combination of skill, luck, and the timing of surrenders. His last tank had been abandoned near the Ruhr pocket in April 1945, out of fuel and ammunition. He rarely spoke about his service, but in a 1987 interview conducted for a German military history project, he reflected on the evolution he'd witnessed. "We entered Normandy believing we were invincible. The Panther was the finest tank in the world. This was not propaganda. This was demonstrable fact. And yet, we lost. We lost because the enemy had 10 tanks for every one of ours. Because they had fuel when we didn't. Because they had air superiority. Because they could afford to learn from mistakes that killed entire battalions. By the end, their 76mm guns weren't miracle weapons. They were adequate weapons, in sufficient numbers, wielded by adequately trained crews. And adequate, in sufficient quantity, defeats excellent when excellent is scarce. The testing data from Kummersdorf survived in fragments. Soviet archives contained some technical reports. American intelligence recovered others. The photographs of shot-up Panthers marked with penetration points became historical curiosities, studied by post-war armor designers trying to understand the evolution of tank combat. But the real lesson wasn't in the technical data. It was in the human story behind it. German engineers who tested, captured American guns and understood their capabilities. German tankers who faced those guns and learned their lethality. American crews who died in burning Shermans until enough died that the survivors learned how not to die. The 76mm gun didn't win the war. Industrial production won the war. Air superiority won the war. The ability to sustain casualties and continue fighting won the war. But the 76mm gun was the tool that made American tank crews legitimate threats to German armor rather than mobile coffins waiting for execution. And in the mathematics of attrition that defined the Western Front after D-Day, legitimacy was sufficient. The last operational Panther in American hands was tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Through 1946, engineers fired every weapon in the Allied arsenal at it from various ranges and angles. The 76mm M1 gun, at 2,000 yards, failed to penetrate the frontal armor, succeeded against the side armor 4 times out of 5 attempts. The data confirmed what the war had already proven. Adequate is enough when you have enough adequate. The final image from Kummersdorf that survives in historical archives shows a Panther hull section, preserved as a technical sample. White paint marks indicate impact points from various Allied guns. British 17-pounder, 3 penetrations from 1,000 meters. American 76mm, 4 penetrations from 1,500 to 2,000 meters. Soviet 85mm, 5 penetrations from 1,000 meters. Each mark represented a lesson learned. Each penetration proved a vulnerability exploited, and, collectively, they told the story of how the Wehrmacht's finest tank was defeated not by superior enemy tanks, but by enemies who learned to stop fighting on German terms. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.